What's up, guys? How are you all doing today? Um, Welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to talk about this topic that, first of all, just to kind of give you guys a background for those of you who don't know. Right now, I am working on my master's in psychology and concentration in marriage and family counseling, right? So it's not the MFT. It is not a marriage and family therapy degree. It is a non-licensed Master's of Science, Marriage and Family Counseling, right? So, the knowledge that I've gathered so far, not just from my formal studies, but also from my informal studies, um, I like to use that to help people, right, to make better decisions when it comes to their relationships, not just romantic, but just any kind of relationships, right? So, anyways, in this video, I want to talk about the age gap relationships. So a lot of people in our society, if you compare today, 2023, to, like 10 or 15 years ago, like 2008, 2009, even all the way to 2013, I think it's indisputable to say that society today has become more open minded and more progressive. And there's obviously good and bad to that, right? So, want to be open minded to the right things, not to the wrong things. But oftentimes, that's where a lot of people in society get it wrong, is they just kind of open their minds to everything. And the problem with that is it shuts you off from being able to discern and to sift. And it's like, okay, which information is useful, which information is not useful. And so that is the proper way to have an open mind, not just open minded to everything, right? So, um, a lot of people say that age is just a number, right? How many of you guys have heard of that? I have heard of that so many times. Is that true? No, of course not. It is not true that age is just a number. And I don't just mean that in a literal sense, right? Because oftentimes there is a correlation between someone's age and their understanding level, right? The experiences that they have gone through, the education, formal and informal, that they have acquired, their economic background, their race, their gender, their religious orientation, their sexual orientation, etc., etc. All these things, they are many factors that play parts in shaping the person's psyche, right? Their social and psychological development. And so it's inaccurate to say, for the most part, that age is just a number, that it shouldn't matter what somebody's age is. What matters is their understanding and how mature they are. That's only a catchphrase. For the most part, there's no evidence to prove that this is a sound statement. And that's actually something that you learn in graduate school, especially when it comes to methodology. You learn on how to distill between common sense and common folk wisdom and actual viable scientific knowledge. And this is, excuse me, this is one of those statements that obviously it does not make sense. Kind of like the opposites attract. The evidence overwhelmingly does not support the statement that opposites attract. For the most part, people who are in relationships, people who are married, tend to be more similar on many psychological and psychometric measures than different, right? So that just obviously throws that statement out of the window. The same thing applies to age gap relationships. So, for example, if somebody is 27 years old, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to be in a relationship with somebody who is 20 years old, right? Because there is a whole 7 year gap that oftentimes is very difficult to bridge for the 20-year-old. And again, I know a lot of people tend to focus on the exceptions and they want to give the younger person the benefit of the doubt and say, Well, I know there are people who are younger and more mature for their age, and I know people who are older and not very mature. But you have to understand that these are exceptions. So exceptions don't break the rule, they actually prove the rule, right? And the same thing with, although as you get older, the age difference becomes less and less relevant. So if you are somebody who's 30 and you are in a relationship with somebody who's 20, it's not really going to work out, right? Now, if that same person turns 30 and you turn 40, that age gap becomes less relevant. And then, 50 and 40, even less relevant. 60 and 50, even less and less relevant. And the reason why that is, it's because there's a sort of like psychological convergence that occurs. Because here's the thing when it comes to wisdom and knowledge. The growth of wisdom and knowledge does not occur in a straight line, right? It occurs in a curved line, right? So for example, let's just say if you are 10 years old over here. So you kind of start off for the first 10 years of your life on a somewhat straight line. Maybe it just deviates a little bit up from the x-axis, right? And let's just say that the y-axis is so the x-axis is your age, right? The y-axis is how much wisdom and understanding you gain. And so when you reach 20 or 21 years old, that's when the curve starts to kind of become steeper, right? And so by the time that you reach 30, you're actually pretty much an adult at that point. And you start to become more similar to people who are older than to people who are younger. Now, that does not mean that a person who's 30 years old is going to have the same level of understanding as someone who's 45 or 50. On average, obviously, that's not the case. But what I'm trying to say is that eventually that difference and that understanding, it becomes easier and easier to converge. And so that's why you notice it's easier for somebody who's 30 years old to understand somebody who's 40 as opposed to them understanding somebody who's 20 because of that phenomenon, right? I hope that wasn't too technical, and I hope this video was helpful. This is just kind of like a little bit of a basic understanding of like how the human mind actually works, because a lot of times most people, understandably so, they don't think about these things, and they definitely don't have the scientific understanding of them, and so they assume things based on like very like things that just kind of stick out, like they cause a huge impression in their minds, and that's where a lot of these common folk wisdom come from. But in reality, a lot of these things fall short of their provability, right? So in other words, they're not really backed up by the evidence for the most part. Hopefully that was helpful to you guys, and maybe I'll do a second part next time. Take care.